Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and it is a pleasure for me to introduce my next guest, the Executive Director for the Banneker-Douglass Museum and the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. With a lifelong passion for museums, my guest is committed to amplifying and supporting African American heritage initiatives, groups, and museums in Maryland. And as an artist, she expresses Black diasporic experiences, history, and identity through portraits, abstract paintings, and mosaics. Please welcome Chanel Compton Johnson. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So as we get started here again, thank you for making the time. And we're recording this in February, and I would imagine it's a lot of things that are asked, a lot of times, burn the candle at both ends, but for a good purpose, obviously. And but yeah, thank you for making that time for this chat. And as I go into this first question, I'd like to really, I guess what I'm looking for is sort of that origin story around creativity, around heritage, around the work that you're doing. So I'm very interested in some of those early creative experiences. Could you share a bit of your early creative background and maybe how it laid some of the foundation for some of the work that you're doing now, some of the interests that you have now?
Yeah. So growing up, I always loved making art. And it was really the women in my family, my mom, my grandmother, my aunt, who really encouraged me. They would hang my stuff up on the refrigerator and always compliment me and say, "You're going to be an artist. You're going to be an artist." And I was like, "I'm going to be an artist," So I claimed that pretty early on. I don't think I ever really wanted to do anything else. Well, that's not true. But early on, that was the first thing I claimed, right? As far as my career trajectory. And I'm talking about career trajectory when I'm 5 or 4, 6 or something like that. This is my path, But yeah. So I ended up going to art school. But I before I get to college, in high school, that's when I really fell in love with museums. I'm from Bridgeport, Connecticut, and the school that I went to was really underfunded, but we had some really amazing teachers. And I tell people I wasn't very interested in school growing up, but it really wasn't until high school that I don't know, I just grew into my confidence a little bit more. And it was really through the encouragement of my art teacher, my English teacher, and other mentors that kind of pushed me into getting into programs and enrichment programs and, being the school representative of this, that, and the third type of thing. So and I loved it, my teacher, Miss Malley, shout out to Miss Malley. She was my high school art teacher. And I don't know how she got the funding for this. I think she paid for a lot of this herself. But she took us on these field trips and these art excursion field trips, right, throughout the state and throughout the tri-state area. And one of the field trips that I remember was going to the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I was just totally blown away. I really thought it was a magical place. I didn't, some of the things I didn't even know what I was seeing really, or I couldn't really articulate. That was the first time that I saw abstract art in that way. So that kind of blew me away. And there was one artist that I saw that just kind of planted the seed for, I think, for my work today and my work in museums. It was by the artist, I saw the work of Leonardo Drew. And he is an installation conceptual artist. He actually graduated from my high school. So he was from Bridgeport, Connecticut. And he actually lived for some time in the housing projects in Bridgeport. So here I am, Bassick High School, and I'm seeing another Bassick High School alum at the Met, So it just completely blew me away. And one of his pieces I saw, it was an installation piece where he used cotton, wood, and filled like the whole wall. And it was, I mean, the wood was like kind of decaying and the cotton was just sprawled throughout the piece. And he was telling the story of the African-American experience in the South. And so I just thought like, you know, that experience kind of like crystallized so many different things, right? Like what a museum could be and how they can present our history, right? In such a magical way, and how it can amplify and like uplift and showcase an amazing talent like Leonardo Drew, who looked like me, you know, he was Black, just like he went to best high school, you know? And so so from that experience, I was like, okay, I want to work in museums. So I went to Mason Gross School of the Arts, at Rutgers University, which was a great experience because, you know, that's where you learn about the fundamentals of fine arts, visual arts, and things like that. But they really didn't showcase, when I went to school, I don't know what their department is now, but when I went to school, I was one of the very few Black folks in that department, undergrads. And they really didn't highlight a lot of Black artists. So I kind of felt a little isolated. Right. But it was through my internships, like working at the Studio Museum. When I moved to DC, I interned at the African Art Museum, that I really began my investment into, you know, learning about Black art, exploring Black art, and sharing Black art in my community arts education work, which is something that I was really invested in. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No.
Kind of went on this like.
No, I appreciate it because it's tapping on like different pieces of sort of these introductory like questions, and I think it definitely helps. So if I tap back on something that seems redundant, let me know. But definitely, I think we're getting a lot of it, and thank you for that because that definitely helps. So when it comes to like your work as an artist, right? Could you describe what your work is? And because I've read paintings, portraits, mosaics, but what are the themes behind it? What are the ideas behind the work?
So my art is really tied to my day-to-day job, and that's kind of been my practice as an artist since I started working in museums. So everything that I learned in my museum work, right, in Black history, is basically transferred into my studio practice. So there's a lot of synergy, right? And that's the only way I know how to just keep balance. And also, those are two things that I'm just naturally inspired by. Like, I'm inspired by the work that I do working in museums, and I'm inspired by, you know, the artwork that I do to celebrate Black history and Blackness. So, some of the themes that I enjoy working on is I love painting African-American figures in history, but I also like painting just regular folks that I might see on the street and take pictures of, you know, family, friends. I just did a mosaic piece for Maryland Public Television of Harriet Tubman. It was a mosaic piece, and it was, I think, one of the best pieces I've ever done. I just completed a commission for the Riversdale House Museum of Adam Francis Plummer, who was enslaved at the Riversdale estate. And he wrote a diary that is currently being preserved at the Smithsonian Anacostia Museum. And he basically taught his family how to read and write. And that's how they were able to find each other after emancipation. So he just has such a tremendous story. So being able to like learn about these folks and then create artwork to further preserve their legacy and history I feel like is a part of my purpose, my life purpose. Yeah. So, yeah.
Was there a sort of like aha moment for you that's like, this is the sweet spot, this is sort of that intersection? And I ask that because when I think of doing this, been doing this for 14 years, right? And not this particular podcast, but podcasting as a whole. But this podcast itself, it was, I can point the timeline. It was, a week after Trump said something goofy about Baltimore, and I was like activated. It was just like, oh, now I'm here,
Right.
that. So that was sort of that aha moment, and seeing, during that sort of nascent period that, people wanted to share sort of their stories in an effort to kind of combat the sort of negative talk about Baltimore and these sort of like negative themes about Baltimore. And if we're being very honest, the negative themes about Black folk in Baltimore. So for you in the work that you're doing, what was the aha moment of sort of the intersection of you have the artist identity, and it's like bringing it to like sort of this arts administrative, this arts management, this museum component?
My aha moment. Oh, okay. I've had a series of aha moment, but my big aha moment, it was when I was getting my master's in arts management, and I was working at Busboys and Poets. I've waited tables for years. Shout out to servers out there, okay? Because
100%.
it's such a great skill set to have. So I was working at Busboys and Poets, and I approached we at the time in school, we were learning about creative alternative spaces, like to showcase art and to have performances and things like that. And I was going to a good amount of shows and alternative, non-conformist type of spaces, right? Like in garages or people's homes or backyards or wherever. So I was like, I really want, mind you, I was relatively new to DC. I was living in DC at the time. And or was I living with my aunt in Maryland? I think I was living in DC around that time. So I was new to the area, and I was like, I really want to do an art show, like to do like an art exhibit, just showcasing my work, right? So I approached Andy Shalal, who was the owner of Busboys. I was like, hey, I want to do an art show. Can I have it in one of your spaces? Like, do you have an alternative space? I don't even think I asked him if I could do it in Busboys. I just said, do you have a space? Right. And so he was like, yeah, I'm building a new restaurant across the street called Eatonville. Eatonville had closed a little while ago, but at the time it was a pretty cool restaurant. So he was building it out, was nothing really in it. It was like this huge industrial space. And he was like, well, you could do our show there. And when I saw it, I was like, I don't got enough work for all this. Like, how am I going to build this up? How am I going to build this space up? Like, this is impossible. So I approached, at the time I was, and again, a lot of artists and, entrepreneurs and creatives can relate. I was just stringing hustles together just to get by, right? So I was waiting tables, but I was also teaching art, like after school art programs. And the teacher that I was working with, she had lived in DC for a while, and she was like an artist. Like, her name is Alicia Cosnahan. Her alias is Decoy, but she's a street artist. So she did a lot of public art. So I approached her and I was like, hey girl, like, you want to do this show with me? And she was like, okay. So she saw the space, and then she got her art collective involved, her street art collective involved. The name was Albus Cabas. And we were like, let's just do a group show. So I was like, okay, cool. And she was like, let's paint on the walls. And I was like, okay, let's paint on the walls. Like, we're going to do a mural show. Great. And so I talked to Andy, and he was like, well, what if you painted with the theme of Zora Neale Hurston? Now, in my mind, I'm like, brother, you about to get some free art. You know what I mean? For your like, okay. But at the forefront, really, I was thinking, I want to have this diverse pool of artists, right? Black, white, Latinx, whoever, right? Learning about this Black woman, Zora Neale Hurston, and painting works to celebrate her. I'm on it. And let me tell you, It was a high that I'm still chasing today. Like just the process of working with all types of artists and how they interpreted Zora's life and her work. And it was really in the conversations that was, grew out of that process about this Black woman was transformative. So I knew that I was like, okay, I know that whatever I do, I want to make sure that I am presenting, celebrating Black and sharing Black history for people to be forever changed by it. And from that, game was on.
Thank you.
So
that's great. And then I definitely have a few thoughts that come out of that. I definitely have to share with you after we wrap here. Yeah, so it's about connections. It's about community and connections. And yes, I see that. Like as I listen to folks, I'm like, that's an idea. That's an idea. Keep going. Tell me more. So talk about your work now with Banneker-Douglass, with Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. What is your role with both of these sort of organizations, and what are your key responsibilities?
So I serve as the executive director of this is how I say my title, my role. I serve as the executive director for the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, and we operate the Banneker-Douglass Museum, which is Maryland State Museum on African American History and Culture, as well as we co-administer with Maryland Historical Trust, the African American Heritage Preservation Grant, which is a $5 million, an annual $5 million capital grant program given to African American museums and heritage sites throughout the state every year. So my role is to, of course, operate the museum. I do a lot of fundraising, management of staff recruitment. I work with boards and our foundation to raise funds for the museum. I do a lot of legislative work with partnering with our legislators on events, on programs, on giving advisement on bills pertaining to African American history in Maryland. And I get to work with the best commission on the planet. I mean, I'm serious. They are like, I have colleagues and they're like, oh, my board, I got to work with all these people and different personalities. But I'm like, well, sucks to be you,
That was good. That was very tri-state right there.
Right. Because they challenge me in the best way. And they're all, we have like lawyers, we have activists, artists, educators. So I just learned so much from them. And there's such a great pool of volunteers where they help support my staff, So it's been really fantastic.
Thank you. So what are some of the key goals and priorities, like in terms of maybe exhibits and maybe programming and maybe initiatives that have come into play that are part of the sort of the recent offerings from your vantage point?
Well, right now we are in the midst of upgrading like a capital project for the museum. So we just completed phase 1 of doing some restoration to our historic wing of the museum, which was once an AME, African American Methodist Episcopal Church. And it was built in 1874. And right now it's where we host our temporary exhibitions and programs and lectures. And it's just a magical space. Frederick Douglass spoke there. And it's incredible. But next year, well, when I say next year, I mean next fiscal year, starting in July, we're going to be completing the building upgrade projects with updating our permanent exhibit, Deep Roots Rising Waters, doing some really stellar programming around the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, and I would say we're really prioritizing on, and this goes with the rationale behind this capital campaign project. We're really trying to equip the museum to do high level, elevated exhibitions, right? So we want to make sure that the space is pristine, that we have the best lighting, the best setup, to be a premier location for Black art. So we're really excited about that. Our current exhibition that we have now is entitled "The Radical Voice of Blackness Speaks of Resistance and Joy," which features 18 Maryland-based artists. And it's incredible. We have works by some folks you probably know: Devin Allen, Joyce Scott. I'm sorry, Dr. Joyce J. Scott. Oh, God, put that in there. She'll let me out. But she's just incredible. And we have Tawny Chapman, Wesley Clark, and a number of other incredible contemporary artists that are right here in our state that many people don't even know are from Maryland. So, yeah, it's exciting.
And that definitely keys in on, one of the things that is a big part of this series, highlighting those folks that often aren't getting their sort of due and their credit of like, that person was here. Yeah, but I care about their work elsewhere. It's like, yeah, but they're from here and they're doing work here as well. If you care about their work, explore, So talk a bit more about the radical voice of Blackness Speaks of Resistance and Joy. Talk a bit more about sort of the process of working with a guest curator and artists to bring this exhibit to life.
So the guest curator is Mertice Berdola. And Mertice Berdola is a gallerist. She owns a gallery in Baltimore City, Gallery Mertice. And you've probably seen her work and a lot of artists that she represents in the Netflix movie Really Love. My work was also in that movie. Shameless plug.
I like it. I like it.
Right. But she's just a phenomenal curator. And I asked her a little while ago if she would guest curate an exhibition at the museum, and she said yes. So I got to fundraising and we made it happen. And it's been such a great journey and experience working with her, because she is an excellent curator. I mean, she really, really is. And so the rationale was, okay, we want to do a show that really, highlights the national Black history of 2023, which is Black resistance. Every year, ASALH, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, presents a Black history theme. This year's Black resistance. We're like, we got to do something on Black resistance. So a lot of the artists that are showcased in the show, Mertice represents or has had experience working with. So she selected all of the artists, and she even pulled some pieces from our own collection to be in the exhibition. And we wanted to make it a multimedia show. This was at the cusp of our capital. Actually, I'm lying. We were doing capital repairs, installing a show, doing all this work like at the same time. So it was a little crazy. It was crazy. Like I'm not gonna lie. And I was on my honeymoon, so that was even more crazy. So I was getting calls in Ghana, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how's lighting? But we got it done, and it is a breathtaking exhibition. I mean, to have an exhibit in that space, in that historic space, with it, we have new pine wood flooring. We were able to salvage the wooden floors in the stage where the historic wood around the stage. So that was really special to us. We did install new walls, new lighting, exhibit lighting, and it is a breathtaking architectural marvel. And so to have the exhibit there is just, I'm over the moon, overjoyed by this opportunity.
That is amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I got three more real questions for you.
Mhm.
One I've just added. So, because you were doing a little too well, so I need to throw a little bit of a curveball in there. Um, in terms of doing one thing well, right? From your vantage point, what is the one thing that is just like, of all things, just like everything is 9.5, but this is my 10. What is that 10?
Mm.
What is that one thing that you do like exceptionally well?
Oh, there's just so many things.
Yeah, I mean that's why
I'm
I
just
was
kidding. What's the one thing I do really well? I think I have very good instinct. Like I think I have very good instinct on talent, and I have good instinct on what's going to move the needle.
So no, that's really good. I think having sort of that as I've been playing with this a little bit recently, because I've had conversations with folks. Tell me about your work and all of this from my vantage point. I'm like, hey, I'm usually asking that question, and in describing it, and it's like, I'm not a storyteller. I'm facilitating people telling their story. I was like, I don't know if I have that skill, and maybe I do, but it's still like I can do certain things in a way, and really being able to identify what those skills are. And I think, enables you when I'm, let's say, working with a team or working with a guest for sake of argument. I was like, okay, this person is chatty, so I can kind of scale back a little bit and be able to not step on them. It's kind of knowing what you do well.
You're a good communicator.
Well, thank you.
I mean, I think yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
So talk about this part, because I've always found this a little interesting. Like being able to balance like how you may personally feel with kind of going through and reviewing and kind of delving back into history and how history works. And it's like, I don't know if I want to dive into this one. And there are some museums and some exhibits and some work that I shy away from. And I'm like, this is a little challenging. This is a little rough, or what have you, especially when we're talking about issues around race and issues around race specifically in America and what the Black experience has been. Could you talk about that? Like how, what's the hardest part for you personally when discussing those issues around race within your work?
That is a great question, and I'm going to combine it with your first question around like what I do well. So what I meant by, oh yeah, I know how to push the needle forward. What I really mean is, I have a love, right, for supporting Black organizations to kind of move the needle and for the next generation, right? Like I'm always thinking about, okay, my successor or, the next round of staff, like, how can I make this organization like the best place to work and where it's full, has plenty of resources to do incredible work. So in moving the needle, one of the things that is important, an important part of that process, right, is sometimes we have to go in places that makes us feel uncomfortable, right? So, and valid questions are, are we scared to do this program based off of the white gaze? And if so, then we definitely got to do this program, right? Or, are we hesitant to do this type of exhibition or, or to partner with this organization because it's either too provocative, or are we operating from a fear of, respectability and systems of white supremacy and all those things, right? So I think my job is to kind of push us through that and to ask those questions when they need to be asked. And to make sure that the work that we're doing is authentic to the Black experience in all of its diversity. I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. You absolutely
okay.
did. And I love that. It's very important to be reflective and be, representative, and at least have that sort of intent. I I see so many different things that come up that say this is sort of this almost what was the word almost monolithic sort of, this is what the Black experience is, and the ideology around it from the folks in those spots that, you know, espouse things like this is for the culture, but it seems like the culture only hits maybe a certain sector, what have you. It's almost a sort of elitist, rarefied thing. And it's like, but this is supposed to be for everyone, and we're supposed to see ourselves in it. And I think one of the things you described so well early on was, you know, the Leonardo, right? And kind of seeing that sort of connectivity early on with maybe part of your story and seeing someone that looks like you and seeing them in the Met. It's like, wow, that's really great work. And, you know, I've had that in the past where I've taken a few different projects on just to show, like, you know, Black kids in Baltimore, hey, you could be in radio, you could be doing this, and it doesn't have to be this sort of one note way of going about it. And, you know, sometimes people don't like that. And sometimes there is a certain agenda behind something that might be driving, like, sort of the respectability, or you're a little too real, you're a little too Black, a little too authentic. And I'm speaking of things that go down in the DMs, as it were. And, you know, I still do it. I still just do it anyway.
I know that's right. Yeah. Because it's your purpose. It's your calling, right? So you can't ignore that.
No, and, you know, why be something that's, you know, I've already done the whole thing of you send the imposter, the whole the representative, that whole imposter thing that you do. And I'd rather just be me and find the people. You know, we talk about tribes and all of that stuff, but find the people that I'm supposed to be around and I'm supposed to be working with. And, you know, I think me doing this and doing this at the volume in which I'm doing it. And I think a lot of times when we find what our work is and we're doing it authentically and we're doing it from our heart and soul and just everything else be damned, that's how it works. Mm. So I got one last real question before I get into the rapid fire questions for you. And this it's almost like an arc here. This last question, because I realized, like, as I'm doing this sort of group of interviews, and maybe it's been in this year, right, that I see changes happening, maybe seeing things with fresh eyes. I've been thinking of things through a lens of maybe cultural preservation, right? And I think as time passes, we treat stories, heritage, culture differently. It's like, oh, that's really what happened. We didn't call it that. And it's like, no, there are archives that say this is what this was. Why are you trying to rebrand a certain piece of history, especially if it's not, you know, your history, you know, certain communities? And there's almost this push to sanitize and cherry pick certain things. Like, when I think of, like, MLK, you know, we look at it in a certain way, you know, from a mass media perspective or what have you. And I remember from a pop culture standpoint, and it was very insidious, I think, back in maybe 2020, right after, you know, George Floyd murder and everything else that came out of that, people seem to be a little bit more sensitive, at least as far as saying that we were on the right side of history, being a little bit more sensitive. But it's like, you did the terrible thing then, whether it be having blackface or having something racially insensitive in an episode of, like, Golden Girls. Let's just scrub it. Let's get rid of it. No, it had to have a disclaimer. So I guess in this whole sort of stream of consciousness here, can you speak to the importance of, like, preserving history, celebrating history, warts and all?
Oh, that's such a good question. I feel like that could be a podcast in and of itself. Because there's so many sides to it, right? And I was actually having a similar conversation with a friend of mine over the weekend because, you know, she just had a baby, and she was basically debating on whether or not she should get books by the author. I can't think of the author's name, who wrote Matilda or something like that, because he used some inflammatory language in some of his books that the new publishers are looking to erase. And I was like, well, that's interesting. So now, you know, are we going to be looking at this author in like authentically, you know what I mean? Like who he was at that time of him writing the book, you know? And then, you know, like I thought, anyway, so I think that it's very important to preserve history, but it's also important that groups that haven't been at the table of institutions to preserve that history, it's important that groups that haven't been recognized in the documentation and presentation of American history are at those tables, or be damned, build their own tables to preserve that history, because it depends on who is giving context to what is actually being preserved, right? And I think about the this debate over the Confederate monuments, like, oh, it's American history. It's American, you know, it's a part of our history, so we should never forget. And I'm like, well, okay, but they're still in the public domain, right? Like they're still being, like, monuments are supposed to be like idyllic, right? So what does that say, you know? So I don't know the question of like they should be removed or put into museums, or I'm not sure, but from my standpoint, they definitely should be removed and replaced with Black abolitionists or something celebrating Black history and those that were instrumental in the anti-slavery movement. I think that, I mean, because at the same time, it still speaks to that history. I am taking this question in a whole different direction.
No.
Please forgive me.
Well, I think,
but
yeah, I think it's good.
So I think exactly, and it's a question of who is giving context. That's why Black archivists are so important. Black museum administrators are so important because they haven't really been recognized. And definitely Black museums. I mean, most Black museums in this nation Black museums in general, right, throughout the nation, most of them opened in like the 70s, 80s. I mean, those are babies in comparison to like the Met or the Walters or, you know, the larger Eurocentric institutions that we're so used to. And even African American scholarship, right? African American studies, that was just popularized, in the 20th century, 21st century?
Right.
So even that is relatively a new field of study in the United States. So, who gives it context is incredibly important. Shout out to Carter G. Woodson.
Shout out indeed. Thank you. That's pretty much it for the real questions. And I got 4 rapid fire questions. If you can indulge me on these, they're, you know, short answers, nothing, you know, overly thoughtful. Well, not overly thoughtful, nothing you need to overthink about, I suppose. So I want to start off with this first one. This is the softball, I think. What's your favorite snack?
Oh, my favorite snack is, because I have so many. Cheetos, for sure. I mean.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
The hard ones, you know what I mean? I don't do the puffy ones.
I don't do that puff stuff. Nah.
I don't do all that, you know. Give me the crunchy ones.
Hey, the type you can put in a food processor.
Exactly. I want experience. Yeah.
I try to fake through it. I'll get like something that's not quite good for you, like white cheddar Cheez-Its, and I'll get like a handful of like unsalted almonds. So like, yeah, it's less fat, right? No, actually it's more. Right.
It's a balance. See, I didn't even think of anything healthy. That's how trifling I am. I do like fruit, but I'm like, that's not a snack. That's a responsibility. It's okay.
Where's the canned pineapple at?
Right.
let's see, in terms of your career, in terms of work, in terms of just how your approach to life at this stage, what has gotten you further, book smarts or street smarts?
Oh, both. That sounds corny, right? But both. Both, seriously. Like, okay, when I got my master's in arts management, you learn the fundamentals of fundraising within an arts nonprofit or a cultural institution. You learn marketing, you learn the fundamentals, right? But when I got started working in museums, at first, early on in my career, I was like, this isn't in the book. Like, this isn't best practice. And it's like, no, like, it's about building relationships. It's about learning the culture of that organization. That is important, right? It's about connecting and not to sound hokey, but it is. It's about building relationships, like building relationships with your staff and finding people's communication styles, because everyone's communication style isn't your own. You know what I mean? And I don't have all the answers. That's another thing. Like, I don't have to show up to a space with all the answers, Yeah. So I don't know if that's book smarts or street smarts. I don't know, but I think that just being real and authentic and honest has led me well.
I think my answer is very similar to that, where I think it's having enough of the sort of technical, some of the book smarts component, I suppose, and in practice, using those street smarts and how to navigate, how to strategically use them when needed. And I rely on this for the longest time. I didn't do any networking, any outreach, any things like that, especially when it comes to like booking a guest. I didn't really need to do any of that. And just learning how to engage into a conversation with someone and, kind of get to yes. I'm like, oh, now I'm actually using some of this stuff, but they almost one hand washes the other. They're working in tandem, the street smarts and the book smarts. So definitely, I think there's a strategic component, but you got to have that foundation that's there of where'd you learn this? You got to have that piece. So let's see, got the quick art question. What are two to three colors that are always like on your palette? Like what colors what 2 to 3 colors?
Orange and blue.
Orange and blue. Okay.
Yeah. Always.
I went to Morgan, so I'm just saying.
Right. I mean, I love contrast. Shout out to Morgan. Yeah, I love contrast, and I just put that is always on my palette. The cool and the hot, for sure.
This is the last one because I always like to check in with folks. We've established a bit of a connection here in this chat, and we're all super busy, and sometimes self-care isn't well cared for. What is a self-care practice that you always make time for?
That I always make time for. Really, I always make time for my family. Like, I always make time to call. I mean, I love my family, including my husband, but I see my husband every day. You know what I mean? So I guess that is a part of self-care because, he's like the best person on the planet, and I love hanging out with him, and he's just perfect and amazing. And in addition to that, I always make time to call my sister, my brothers. I have two brothers, my goddaughter, my niece. If I need a shot of B12, I'll just call them. My mom, my aunt. And now I have to list people because if they listen to this podcast, I'm like, you didn't mention me. So my grandmother, like all of them, my family. I always check in with them. Yeah. And actually, we're celebrating my grandmother's 90th birthday this weekend. We're gonna do an Airbnb in Lynchburg, and it'll be great.
It's great. So it's almost like you were describing like when you win an award. It's like, let me go through my list. I got this person.
Oh my gosh. That's exactly it. Yeah. Because I will get phone calls. You'd be surprised. Yeah.
Well, new listeners. One, I want to thank you for being on this podcast and taking the time yet again, and just sharing and being an open book here. And secondly, I want to invite and encourage you to share with the listeners where they can check out, more of your work, more of the Maryland Commission on African American Heritage and Culture, and all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
Yes, you can check out my work at chanelcompton.net. I'm also currently being exhibited in a group exhibition called The Cost of Living. The Cost of Living, which is being curated by an amazing artist and curator, Nikki Brooks. The opening night is March 3rd at DuPont Underground in Washington, D.C. So really excited about that exhibition. I'll be unveiling a piece that I did of Angela Davis, and it's entitled Abolish Prisons. So, and of course you can follow me on social media at Chanel Nicole Johnson, and more to come.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Chanel Compton Johnson from the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, as well as the Banneker-Douglass Museum. There's a little nesting going on there. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, heritage, history, culture in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.